Hey, I'm Bacon. After last night's published video, I got to thinking about GNS theory, like I had mentioned up front. And the more I thought about it, the more ideas began to swim through my head. And the more, I guess I'm going to call it theorizing at this point, the more theorizing I was doing. Um, Before I start this, huge thank you to Sable Phoenix for sitting through a phone call with me just now to sort of go over this stuff. He has some very important, very pointed questions that help me refine a bit more. And to follow that up, I want to say that this is burgeoning. So I need people to challenge it. I need people to ask me difficult questions so that I can further refine it to see if A, it's worth anything, and if it is worth something, to see how to properly defend it. Um, so if you want to, call me dumb in the comments and tell me why. I know I say that virtually every video, but for this one, I would be particularly appreciative. So if you don't have anything to say, whatever, that's fine. But if you do, as you're listening, sort of have questions that come or critiques that follow, that would be awesome. I would really appreciate that. So GNS. What is GNS? I'm starting with GNS, but I'm going to transition into what is now becoming my own theory of role playing and the purpose of the theory. But I mentioned GNS yesterday, so I'll start there. GNS is gamist, narrativist, simulationist. It's essentially, purportedly, the three ways by which players approach role playing games. In Edward's opinion, who's the one who I guess is credited with this, but it was really kind of founded on the threefold theory, which I don't have to get into for this. But I will at a later date. So, but just bear with me. This is going to be a pretty slapdash video because I didn't plan it. It's in the moment. We had the conversation. I just want to get the thoughts out of my head. Um, so gamist, narrativist, simulationist. Um, Under the theory, it says that players will approach role playing in one of these three different ways. They either look for simulation, they look for game, or they look for narrative. In Edward's opinion, narrative is the most important one, and so simulation and game should support the narrative. And that's what role playing is under this theory that he's credited with developing. This is wrong, and it's wrong because it doesn't consider the action or activity of role playing itself. So I am going to propose that role playing is the central activity. So when people play role playing games, they should be looking to role play. And then those three pillars from the GNS theory, gamism, narrativism, simulationism, I'm actually going to call limiters because they're going to limit the role play in a way that everyone, it depends on the experience that you want to have with the role play. So depending on the proposed experience that you want to have in role playing, you will apply these three limiters in different ways that supports the role play as best as it can to produce the experience you're looking for. Let me start with what role play is, because it's foundational. It's where really I should start. So the definition that I'm going to be using is role playing is the act of assuming the identity, characteristics, or behavior of a specific person or character, often in a fictional or imaginary context. It involves temporarily adopting a role different from your own personality and making decisions and interacting with others based on the assumed roles, goals, motivations, skills, experiences, etc., etc. So this is a broad enough term to be able to apply to improv or theater, but I'm specifically using it for role-playing games obviously that's what the whole channel's about. So that's what role playing is. And then from there, that activity of assuming the role of a fictitious individual and going and interacting with other characters as that person, as that fictitious person, is role play. So the combination of narrative and this is going to be all over the place. It's going to be scatterbrained. I apologize for that. These are just ideas that I need to get out. Again, initially forming, really need to be able to sort of organize it and order it, but I wanted to just get this out there. So from here, I'm going to address the different, I'm going to address the major supposition of GNS theory, and that is the different approaches to role-playing by players. It's why they're called approaches, because this is the way players will approach a role-playing game. So I disagree with that. I don't think that these are ways by which people will approach a role-playing game. They're preferences in the limiters of role-play, but they're not actually approaches to role-play itself. And here's why. If I wanted to play a simulationist game, I could just play, gosh, I got to think of something now. Life, the game of life. It simulates a person's journey through life and making decisions about their career and family finances. It's a bad simulation, but that's kind of the point of the game. It does include game elements, so there is the spinner and there are spaces to move, but it's as close to a sort of purely simulation game as you can get without being like spreadsheets with dwarfs. So that's a simulation. If you really wanted to play a simulation, this is the only simulation game out there, but if you really wanted to play a simulation, you can play the game of life. If you wanted to play a gamist game, you can play Jenga. It's a very physical game. It's a dexterity game, but there is no narrative. And to go back to simulation, so the game of life, there's no real story, and there are some game elements, but they're minimized. So it's the simulation is highlighted. There is no narrative, and aside from what emerges from you playing the game, but that whatever. And the game elements are minimized. So Jenga, there is no narrative to speak of, and there is no simulation. So Jenga is a purely gamist game. And then a narrative game would be something like Gloom. Gloom is a card game where you sort of use the cards to tell a story, a humorous story about like Addams Family style families. It's not complex. It has minimal game mechanics, but it has very, very prominent story elements or narrative elements. And again, I feel like I'm scatterbrained here because I'm trying to go too fast. So that's a narrative. That's a narrative game, a simulation game, and a game, which is silly to say, but whatever. These aren't my terms. I'm just working with them. So then what happens if we go to narrative simulation? Like what happens if we combine two of these things, right? So a narrative simulation, and this isn't a game that I have any experience with, but there's a game out there called The Grizzled, where you are World War I soldiers facing the horrors of war, which is the narrative element, and then you're trying to survive by managing limited resources, which is the simulation element. So you can do a narrative simulation game. Game and narrative would be Betrayal at House on the Hill, which is where you're exploring a haunted mansion and you encounter events and items, which are the game element, that contribute to the narrative storyline, which unfolds differently each game. So it's randomly decided each game. And then a game and simulation. Again, that was game and narrative. Then there's game and simulation. Ticket to Ride. It is simulating the logistics and planning involved in railroad operating and building, and it is a game in that there's cards and there's the the different pieces and whatnot. So there are game elements to that. So that's game and simulation. So you can do all of them individually, and you can pair them all up with a double and result in a game. And then we can do all three too. So a narrativism, gameism, and simulationism game is going to be Pandemic, but even better, Pandemic Legacy. So it's telling the story of a worldwide outbreak. I'm losing my train of thought here. So you work together to stop the spread of disease, and it combines the evolving story of the global outbreak with turn-based like resource management and strategic resource management, and it simulates the spread of the disease and efforts to contain them. So this is all three of those pillars, and not a single one of these games is a role-playing game, right? There are roles in some of them, like in Pandemic, there's a role of the medic, but like you're not a specific medic, and you're not assuming you're not entering the headspace of that medic. Medic just means you just have abilities that you can use through game mechanics to change game states. But there's no role play involved. So these games, if I'm a simulationist, right, I can play a simulationist game. If I'm a game narrativist, I can play a game narrativist game. I don't need to role play. So then why do people approach role playing? It's to role play. And so in this theory that I'm developing, the three, and I'm going to call them limiters now again, not pillars, the three limiters are going to determine, it's going to hem in role playing and put restrictions on what you're able to do, or what you agree to be able to do within the confines of role playing to get at a experience that you want to have. So then the question arises, well, does role play require these three things? Is role play essentially just a sort of twisted combination of all three of these pillars? And the answer is no. It's no because of LARPing. I have very limited experience with LARPing. I know it kind of gets a bad name, but in this model it ends up becoming very important because it demonstrates that role-playing is separate from these three. It's separate, and it's on its own, and it's independent. It is the central pillar. And then the other three things support it. So in LARPing, there doesn't have to be a narrative. You can just be a merchant going about your daily life. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Penzic. It's a huge event that happens in the United States annually, and there are different things that can be determined in an overarching story as far as which kingdoms are reigning and blah, blah, blah. But you can just be a merchant. So you can just be a merchant doing your merchant things daily. Maybe it's rounding bread up in a cart and bringing it to the market. Maybe it's traveling between areas to be able to provide, cross commerce, any of those, whatever a merchant does, that's what you're going to do in this LARP. So that's not, there's no narrative there. And you can do a whole LARP based on that. So there doesn't have to be a narrative. It's minimized. The game mechanics are going to be minimized because it's essentially going to be, in the case of vampire, it's going to be rock, paper, scissors. That's the only game mechanic by which you will determine, that's your action resolution system is just rock, paper, scissors. Very, very minimal game. And then there's the simulationist element, which, you can use like Nerf balls or whatever to toss fireballs or to simulate magic. But that's it. There doesn't, and here's the thing. You could possibly make the argument that isn't LARPing like hyper simulationist because you're essentially attempting to simulate the experience? My answer is no, and my answer is no because you're actually doing it, right? So you might not exist in a medieval era as a medieval merchant, but you are actually recreating that live. And I would argue that's not a simulation. So as long as you're in that character and you're in the world and you're actually living it, the simulation piece falls away too, so it's been minimized. So you don't need those three things in order to roleplay, which means roleplay exists independent and apart from those things. And so they become preferences. There are going to be players who prefer a narrative-heavy style of play, a more narrative style of play, I'll say. There are going to be players who prefer more integrated simulation pieces or more integrated game pieces. But here's the thing. You can actually harm the role-playing by over or under applying these elements or these limiters. So examples of over application are Hornmaster for simulation. So Hornmaster, like yesterday when I was making the point that you're constantly being yanked out of character, and pardon me for not really going into it here, kind of forcing you to watch the other video from yesterday. But I think that this is, I'm just not going to get into it. So yesterday I mentioned that you're constantly being yanked out of character to facilitate the narrative, and that's harming the role play. Again, harm. This isn't anything that's like super serious. No one's dying for real here. So that's how you can over apply the narrative. So it would be something like Trollbabe or another game that attempts to sacrifice role playing for specifically the narrative. Then there's Hornmaster, which is a game that really tries to simulate as much as it possibly can, but you're constantly getting yanked out of character to go and check a table or to do some math, and that's harmful to the roleplay experience. And then I would actually say that Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, a game that I haven't brought up on this channel at all until now, is going to be game heavy because you're rolling for perception, or you're rolling for acrobatics, or you're rolling for perception, or you're rolling for combat, or you're rolling for perception. It really emphasizes rolling dice to produce an outcome, which is very gamey, and that harms the role-playing experience. So you can over apply these limiters and you can harm the role-playing experience. Now, you also can under apply them to harm the role-playing experience, and the way that works is by what I was describing yesterday, or maybe it was earlier in this video. I don't know anymore. I'm just talking. So if I have the simulationist and the gamist components point to the narrative and not roleplay, then you're under applying both simulationism and gamism. And if I likewise if I apply the narrative and the simulation that points at gaming, you're under applying those other two. So, and that's so it's kind of like it's a balance, which means in order to gauge the appropriate level of application for game, simulation, and narrative, you have to compare it back to the experience you're trying to achieve, Now I'm slurring my words because I'm just like this. I don't know. I feel like I'm so rushed to get this out. So it's not narrative. There are no pillars. There's one pillar. The pillar is role playing. People come to role playing not because they want to do narrativism or simulation or gamism. Those things can be a part of role playing. They aren't necessary to be a part of role playing. They come to role playing to role play. So the answer then becomes, why do people role play? And this is something that Sable Phoenix and I kicked around a little bit. This is a very dissatisfying answer. Maybe it's something that I have to address in the future. I don't think it's something that I have to address right now, though, because the goal of developing this criteria or model or theory or whatever you want to call it is to be able to properly gauge tools for role playing. So you want to be able to make sure that in the context of the experience that you want to create, the tools support the role play to that end. And so it sort of becomes this sliding scale. How much is too much simulation if what I want is to simulate a medieval world that takes place exclusively in a tavern that is all about, I don't know, bar fighting? How much simulation is too much? How little simulation is too little? And then you try to support the role play. And again, you know, this might be a bad example because it's very not coherent. But and then you go to narrativism and you say, if this, you know, if the experience I want to craft is X, then what is the over application of narrative? What is the under application of narrative? And then let me hit it. And I don't even like that word narrative. Like, narrative comes with way too much baggage. I come from storytelling. Like I have been a professional editor, and this isn't something I've really brought up before. So I've been a professional editor. I've been a professional script reader for an independent movie studio. I have worked on movie sets. Probably nothing that anyone has heard of, but I have worked in Hollywood. I used to live there. I used to get called to set all the time. So I come from storytelling, and narrative is something that, as I explained in my first video, it's something that has it has a structure, right? So role playing, and I'll just pull my script up here. So I say role playing is none of these things. It's not a sequential account of events. It's a simulated actual sequence of events. There's no overarching central theme, and it does not indicate a moral or lesson by design, and it does not adhere to a specifically defined structure. So that's what a narrative is. So it's sequentially arranged series of events that contains characters, central theming, sometimes indicates a moral or lesson, and adheres to a specifically defined structure as dictated by genre. So now I forget where I was going with this. Oh no, I have to pick up my train of thought. Oh, I don't like narrative. So I don't like using that word narrative. So I'm actually going to rest on the threefold models proposal that it's actually drama, right? So it's not about narrative. It's not about specific story points. Let's get rid of that baggage and dump it. It's going to be drama. So those are the limiters. The drama, the simulation, and the gameism. And how much on a sliding scale are each of those going to support the role play to create the experience that you're looking for, that you've signed up for in the social contract? That's the model. That's the theory. The theory is role play. It's going back to what was unsatisfactory. I know I kind of trailed off there, but what's unsatisfactory is that I am not really at this moment interested in figuring out why people role play. Like, I could get into it. We could, like, anytime anyone asks why human beings do something, I have a propensity to go back to evolution. I'm not really societal evolution, not biological evolution, which I guess kind of go hand in hand, but societal evolution in particular. Why do we play? Well, we play to be able to put ourselves in situations to sort of envision the types of decisions that we would make in those situations. When it comes to survival, like being able to imagine, you know, whatever a predator might be, like a tiger, bad example, but like I can imagine myself in a situation with a tiger and go, oh, you know what? There's no shot. I'm not surviving with a tiger, so let me just avoid tigers. That becomes very important with survival. And then as society evolves, those sorts of actions are hard-coded into human behavior, but because they're no longer really necessary, they become leisure. It's kind of like the example I used with Sable Phoenix was Back to the Future 3. Like, oh, well, what do you do for fun in the future? We go for walks. You walk for fun? Like, we don't need to walk anywhere. I don't need to go anywhere. I can sit on my fat butt in my house. I can have groceries brought to me. I can have anything I want delivered to my door. And then if I do want to go outside, I can sit on my butt in the car and go somewhere. So we don't have to walk because technology has progressed to a point, well, society has progressed to a point where it's produced technology to be able to allow for that. So we go on walks for leisure or to stay fit or to do it for fun. And so play, specifically like role play or make-believe, is sort of one of these vestigial it's one of these vestigial activities that we do for recreation. I'm not a doctor. That could be total crap. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that I'm not interested in that right now. That's not what this model is for. Like I can throw a guess out there. I could be correct. I could be incorrect. But it doesn't matter because that's not what I'm trying to do here. I don't care why people role play, because when you ask someone why they role play, if you ask them in the middle of 7 different campaigns, you're going to get 7 different answers. Maybe they want to unwind. Maybe they want to see what it's like to be the most evil jerk they can be in the world. There's a bunch of different answers they can give as far as why they role play. And so because it's so wide and varied, I don't care. That is up to the individual to determine why they want to role play. I want to be able to say what role play is, which I defined at the top of the video, and then I want to be able to say what does good role play look like, and that's going to be something that I need to develop moving forward, because I haven't come up with anything for that. And that's not true. I have thought about it. I have come up with some things, but it needs a little bit more kicking around before I actually present it to anyone. But in the meantime, I can say that the model I will be developing this additional piece according to is going to be role play as the central activity. It's the central pillar. I guess I don't know if it's worth having pillars if there's only one, but there that is. Then the limiters of the role play activity are going to be simulation, narration, simulation, drama, and game. And then depending on how these things are applied, rather how much of these things should be applied in order to appropriately limit the role play to produce the experience you want. Sometimes you might have to go simulation heavy. Sometimes you might have to go narration heavy, but it should always, always, always be in support of the role play and not one of the other limiters. You're not going low simulation to be able to support the narrative. You're going low simulation because that's what the role play calls for. You're going low game because that's what the role play calls for. You're going, high narration, low narration, whatever it happens to be. I don't want to repeat myself 7 times. That gets boring. So that's the model. The model is role play constrained by drama, simulation, gameism in the effort of producing the experience that you want to produce based on, conversations you've had around the table and the social contract and the type of game you're entering into. So that's the model. I don't know what I'm going to call this video. Whatever. So please, if you've watched to this point in the video, thank you. If there are any questions, if I've missed anything, if I haven't explained anything well enough, please do ask the question. Please do challenge me, because it's brand new, it's burgeoning. Maybe it gets stomped out, maybe it gets killed in the cradle. That's okay. I'm not going to roll over. I do want to put up the effort of considering the challenges, considering the questions, hammering it out, and seeing what I can come up with, and if this is defendable. I think it's very defendable because the goal of role-playing is role-playing, or producing the experience through role-play as limited by these limiters that I've described. So that's it. I'm going to stop here because that's all I have. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really excited to continue this line of thought. There's still a little bit more that I need to develop because I'm going to need to incorporate, like, metagaming versus immersion, which I know, immersion, maybe I'll come up with a different term. It's not a great term because, like, well, whatever. Something I need to think on before I present it. Thank you again. Take care. See you in the comments.